Okay, so hi everybody, my name is Lisa Vanderf. I'm the program chair for the Masters in Organisational Psychology and Behaviour. And we're really excited to have Sarah join us today. Sarah is the head of employee experience for Qualtrics, and she's also an alumni from our program. And so she's really very kindly agreed to join us to give you a little bit of insight into what it's like to be a student on the program, and maybe how she's used some of the content from the program in her career as well. So thank you so much, Sarah, for your support. We really appreciate it. I think it's invaluable for people that are considering the program to hear it from somebody who's graduated recently. Thank you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So nice.
You want to kick off by just telling us a little bit about what you do and maybe what attracted you to the program in the first place?
Yeah, sure. So I work in tech, I suppose, and it's odd for me to say that because I wouldn't have considered myself a tech person for a very long time, but I do work in tech. I work for a company called Qualtrics. Qualtrics is I guess at its core, it's a survey platform, but in our marketing and how we've managed to grow our business and elevate what we do, we position ourselves as an experience management platform. It means that we help organizations understand the experiences that their customers are having and that their employees are having. The masters at DCU. Oh, my Zoom is telling me my internet's dropping in and out. So hopefully.
Speaking of tech industry.
Yeah, right. So why did I look into doing this masters, and why did I start? So I had been a kind of career consultant for a number of years, and very much on the practical side. So very much always in HR and very much a practitioner, and had done about 5 years agency side. 6 years, gosh, agency side. So working with companies and always in that employee survey space. So doing a lot of kind of working with companies on deploying these programs, reporting out, it always kind of, I would say, very tactical stuff. And in that time had gotten interested in maybe a bit more of the theory, but not massively so. And then sometime internally, I was a kind of an internal HR practitioner at Tesco, of all places, for a short time. So I'd done very much a kind of very practical, focused learning through being in the trenches. And then I started working at Qualtrics, and they paired me up with this guy called Ben Granger, and he was the complete opposite to me. He'd done a PhD in IO psychology. He's from Louisiana in the US. And me and him, I have a tendency to be a bit arrogant sometimes. And so I'd be like, oh yeah, I know everything. I've done all this stuff. And then he just came along and would just like hit me with this stuff that I realized I knew nothing about. And from working with him, I just realized that there was a gap in my knowledge, and that I wanted to maybe explore and understand a few more of the academic principles behind what the work that I was doing, which led me to investigate kind of org psychology programs in Ireland and in Dublin.
Great. Okay. And what was the reality of the program in comparison to what you thought it might be like? Or
in what aspect? Because we could get deep on this.
You get as deep as you like. So what did you think it was going to be like? Was there anything that surprised you? Or
yeah, so this is the only masters. There's a lot of new things in this for me. So I've never done a master's before. I've never done a part-time kind of education before while I was working, and I'd never done a degree in psychology before. So I got my undergrad degree in 2005 in German. So like totally unrelated and totally different. So I had really no expectations, I would say, of what it would be. The reality, it was about 1 million times harder than I expected. It was
Yeah.
really quite intense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those two things. And I'm going to caveat, because I'm probably going to give you guys a very real and honest view of how it was, but I'm going to caveat all of that with this: it's probably the most rewarding thing I've ever done, certainly in the last few years, and completely was a game changer for me personally. So absolutely worth it. And just the amount of stuff that I didn't know, the amount of stuff that I learned, even just you know, you'd have these like 3-hour lectures, and then I just felt like I'd walk away and I was like, oh my God, there's an entire new world that I just got pointed at that I had no idea existed. You know, when you just don't know what you don't know. And I think that was a huge eye opener for me.
Yeah. And I guess, like you mentioned, that it was hard and really intense. And I think that's really important for people to understand before they come back, because that was also my experience. So I did this program in 2007, and I had a similar slight shock about the intensity and the level of commitment that it required. Do you say were the most challenging parts of doing the program?
The most challenging part, I think all of it. So lectures are hard. I have quite an intense, like I was working for a fast-paced tech company. It's quite an intense job. And I would leave work at like 1 p.m. on a Wednesday, get on a bus from Stephen's Green, like walk 10-15 minutes in the rain up to outside the Westin Hotel. I've already forgotten the name of that street. And then get on the number 11 bus up to DCU, which took about 45 minutes, usually in the rain. And it's just miserable. Like, honestly, when you're kind of trekking up to uni and you're tired and you've already had a very intense day, and then you know you're going to go and like sit and have 3 hours of lectures and then get on the bus all the way home. Like it's long and it's hard. So that's definitely, that was definitely a part of it. But what I will say is that, and I got lucky, so I had a group, we all were given work groups. My group was just spot on, like absolutely solid, like a really nice group of people. Nobody was too intense, nobody was too pushy, everybody kind of respected everybody else's boundaries, and we were very much a support group for each other as well. So there was always a happy knowledge that there would be friendly faces and happy faces kind of at the end of this journey to get to lectures. So I can't even remember your original question.
I asked you what was the most challenging thing.
Yeah.
And I think, like, if I reflect on my experience, it was fitting it in around a full-time job. And I was the same. I had a reasonably intense job in one of the big four. And I was already working a reasonably long week, and then trying to find the extra kind of 15 hours or so. And it's probably 15 to 20 hours by the time you add the lecture time plus what you have to do. Just trying to find that time in my week, I found that hard.
Super hard, but you do find it, and it's amazing how much you realize you can make room for doing this additional stuff. And I really enjoyed having the imperative to sit and learn. Like, I'm self-motivated in a way, but I'm not in a way. If I don't have an external accountability, I just wouldn't sit down and read this stuff or explore this stuff by myself. But because I have this kind of external accountability, that's what I needed to just sit and read and learn and think and write. And that worked really, really well for me. But it was also super hard. Then I will say the other hardest thing was the dissertation was legitimately the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Like, I remember at one point, at many points, just sitting there and going, I have no clue what I'm doing. Like, I have no idea. And I remember when I submitted it, I was like, this could be brilliant or it could be absolute shit. And I have no idea what it's going to be. I think I said that to you when I handed it in. It was just so difficult. And I feel like I was not prepared for how difficult that piece of work would be.
Yeah, it's hard, and it's the one piece that's so independent. Like, you don't have other people in your class that are working on the same assignment. I know everybody's doing a dissertation, but yours is so particular to you and your interests. I think it's much easier with other assignments. You can kind of benchmark and say, what do you think of this or what? But other people aren't as familiar with what you're doing, and it's difficult. Yeah. Well, you mentioned there about your team and how useful they were kind of as a support network. I think it might be interesting for other people to hear what was sort of the makeup of that team, like what kind of backgrounds did they come from and how did you function as a group?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we were 5 in the group, definitely a mix. So one of us was a HRBP at DAA. So she was very much, I would say, an HR generalist, again, like very much on the front lines, you know, working with managers in her business, working with leaders, like putting all of this theoretical stuff into practice, actually trying to make it policy and make it stick in the business. One small business owner who had started his own coaching business. I think he was quite entrepreneurial, always looking for an angle, you know, had sort of found this kind of niche of wellness in organizations. And so, yeah, always had a bit of a sales head on him and quite, I would say, kind of, what's the right word for him? Like that kind of entrepreneurial go-getter. Like
Yeah.
And then we had one GM of I still don't really understand what his company does, something to do with chemicals and manufacturing. So he was the GM for Ireland. So he was quite he was like a pure business and not an HR person at all. His company was paying to do the program, and I guess it was just to kind of broaden perspectives and add another string to his bow. And then one reasonably fresh grad, I think she was a fresh grad who had just graduated in psychology and was in sort of work, but also doing this on the side to kind of continue her career. So she was a good bit younger than the rest of us. So you'd think on the face of it, we were a group of people, we were all quite different, but for whatever reason, everybody was just brilliant and we all got on amazingly and everybody added value. And like I said, we were all, I think, very respectful of each other. And I decided quite early on that I wasn't going to worry too much about the grades on my group work. I remember quite early on in the course, one of the teachers said to us, the way it's been weighted is not that group work will ever make up a huge portion of your grade. And I just mentally made the decision, like, this group is not my get really good grades group. This group is my social group, my support group. And so I'm never going to lean in and like push really hard if I don't agree with a piece of work that we're doing together in the direction that it's going. As long as we get something between 65 and 70, like, we're good. You know, actually, as long as we get 60, we're good. So never really, I made like a conscious decision, and I think we all did, and I think that was really important. That group is not about getting great grades. That group is something else. It's another it gives you another type of support or another type of outcome from the course than actually grades.
Yeah, I think that support is so important. And I think, like, if I reflect on my experience of it, one thing that I really learned from my group was, I guess in my group, I was probably the reasonably recent grad. I had only had like 4 or 5 years work experience when I came back to do the master's program. And then in my group, there was a lady who was the head of one of the social welfare offices. There was a lady who'd been working in change management for a big bank for 20 years. There was a guy who was the head of comp and bends for an insurance company. And then there was somebody that worked for like a small family firm. And I guess because I had only had 4 or 5 years work experience, I kind of thought that all organizations were like my organization, like that everywhere was like a professional service firm. And I didn't realize the extent to which organizations were so different from each other and how important context was in understanding the kind of material that we were covering in class. And so I found the conversation in my group, I actually learned almost as much from that and from like people saying, yeah, well, what you do would never work in like my social welfare officer would never work in the bank, and here's why. And that sort of debate I found really useful for me. Opened my eyes anyway to the fact that there was a whole world of organizations that I wasn't familiar with.
Right.
Yeah. I guess we've talked a lot about the, like, when we're not trying to talk anybody out of doing it, but I did ask Sarah to give like a really honest account of what it's like, because I think it's definitely worthwhile going in with your eyes open and making sure that you have thought about the sacrifices that you'll have to make to try and keep up with coursework and to try and find that 15 to 20 hours a week in your lives. But maybe if we just think a little bit about the relevance of the course material and things, Sarah, I'd be really interested to know if you have any examples of times where coursework was relevant to what you were doing in your job, or anything that you've used since. Or
yeah, it's I'll caveat everything I say. I'll caveat everything I say with, I do know that different people in the whole program, not even within my group, but across the whole program, had different feelings about how relevant the material was. But to give you my perspective, one of the things I really liked about this course, and coming again from a background where I hadn't done a psychology degree, and I was starting really with some very practical hands-on experience, but not a lot of grounding in theory. I really liked the way that it felt like the course was quite academic in places and kind of covered that org psychology stuff that I know it's important to know, but I don't know that I'd ever apply it in my working life. And that stuff like the psychometrics piece and the research theory and all of that stuff. But then there was also this aspect that I just felt was very practical and very applicable. So there was a module that we did on strategy, which I really, really enjoyed. Leadership, change. There was a piece around talent management, practical applications. There was just a lot that I thought I really, really liked, that blend of both. And I feel like for me, that was the right mix. And it got to the right kind of level of theory depth for me again. And everything that it covered was new to me. So I'd never learned anything about strategy. Like, I've never done an MBA, so I don't know anything about Porter's five forces or any of that stuff. And the fact that we got to learn that, for me personally, I found super, super relevant. But what I will say is that I don't know that that was the view that I got from everyone around. And I think there were some people who came in who had already done, you know, they'd done a number of, they'd actually done master's degrees before, or they'd done different qualifications or diplomas in, you know, certain areas. And I think that there definitely was, I know from some other people, that there just wasn't new stuff that was learned. So I would describe, and Lisa, you might completely disagree with this description, but I would describe it as a very kind of good broad base. And I really enjoy that I have a really solid knowledge of, you know, the kind of fundamental thinking around kind of motivation theory, right? And I know the good schools there, and then coaching and the different types of coaching and different forms of leadership and different aspects of looking at strategy and what is talent management and what underpins it. I feel like it gave me a really good grounding in a broad range of areas, and that's what I wanted. But I wouldn't say that it goes super deep into any one of those particular areas. And so if you're somebody who already has that broad grounding, the content might not be completely right.
Yeah, I mean, I think to go deeper, you have to do a PhD. To learn more, like to be more than what you got on motivation or more than what you get on. And I guess that's how I ended up back in academia, was I wanted to understand more about workplace relationships and how people built like cooperative collaborations in work and things like that. And I guess I got a taste for it in the master's, and when I went back to work, thought about the bits that I still didn't know, and sometimes I think it's surprising for a master's program. I think it's always sort of surprising when you realize that there are a lot of unanswered questions in the literature. So it's not that there is an answer necessarily for which is the best leadership style, for instance, or you know, you can't like look it up and say, okay, from now on, this is the approach I'm going to take to all organizational change projects. There's so many kind of debates and unanswered questions and things like that as well.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah. And I would say as well that there's probably quite a bit of difference across people in terms of which modules they find most easily to apply to their work. Like, even if you think just about the people who made up my team and who made up your team, there are some people that are like working in more strategic positions. Like I remember when I did it, and we talked about strategy and stuff, I was so far from making strategic decisions in my organization at the time that those things just felt like, oh yeah, okay, fine. I have to learn that and I'll write about it. But like it didn't really like interest me in the same way maybe as it did for you when you did it. Whereas it was the organizational psychology piece that I really loved, because I had a psychology background and I was struggling to bring what I had learned in my undergrad into my kind of HR type role. And it sort of built a bridge for me between those two things.
I think that's really fair to say, and I would have said the same in my group. Like everybody had different areas that they kind of spiked on particularly.
Yeah. And that's one reason why the group is useful as well, because people with more experience in different areas can kind of help the others out, I think, a little bit as well. Tell us a little bit then about your dissertation. You mentioned that it was legitimately the hardest thing that you have ever done. What did you study and how? And
what did I study? This is the whole thing about the dissertation. It's like your entire life for 6 months, and then I submitted it, and then I kind of went into a post-traumatic kind of scenario where I just didn't think about it. And then I picked it up and reread it actually about a month ago, and like almost cried at I was like, it's actually pretty good. So what did I look at? I looked at whether certain people with certain motivational dispositions react differently to certain work environments than other people. So what that means is when you read about the motivation literature, they all kind of say these types of job environments will equal more motivation. And that is, you know, you could say broadly speaking true, but I was very interested in, well, can you say that that is a universal truth for everyone, or are certain people genuinely motivated by different things? And do some people, you know, I'm a bit obsessed with this idea, I still am actually, that a lot of this research and a lot of the literature is based on basically kind of knowledge workers, and we all love to kind of sit and think and work conceptually and all the stuff, and I just sort of wonder whether actually not everybody wants to have like a career, not everybody wants to you know, be kind of inspired and motivated, and I'm genuinely interested to know, is there a group of people who just want you to pay them a fair wage for work well done, and then, you know, we can have quite a transactional relationship, and that's that. And so I was very interested in coming at it from that individual person-centered approach. And I have a tendency to maybe not overcomplicate things, but I definitely go big. So obviously I went in with this like super ambitious research question, and then sort of, and I also have a tendency to walk headfirst into things, and then I find myself in the middle of it and I can't figure out a way out. And that's definitely what happened to me with that dissertation.
And your supervisor was Margaret, was it?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Not gonna lie, I was disappointed at my supervisor relationship, and I still don't know whether that's because my expectations of what a supervisor offers you were off or not. So I think because I've never done this before, I think what I expected from a supervisor is that there would be sort of maybe a bit of a thought partner and helping to you know, just helping at each step of the way, and helping kind of think through the analysis and look at the results and what might these mean and everything else. And it wasn't really like that at all. It was much more transactional. I don't think it helped that she was kind of on holiday for a big chunk of when I needed to hand in the chapters that I was handing in. So I would say that my relationship with my supervisor was not, it was helpful, but it wasn't what this kind of, fountain of inspiration that I think maybe I was hoping that it would be. And I also think, I suspect that the research question I started with was in her wheelhouse. I think the research question that I ended up with, because there's a good, 9 months, 6 to 9 months between when you get to find your supervisor and you sort of really lock down the final question. I think that the research question I ended up with is not really in her area of interest or expertise. So it just sort of fizzled, I would say. So if I would have any advice, I would definitely I don't think the supervisor will basically kind of react as much as you push in. And in some cases you might need to push in more and keep poking to get the equal amount of pull. And the other thing that I didn't realize that there was a bit of a rude awakening was that there was no feedback on the dissertation, which I think after you have invested so much of your time into it, I think I had expected it to be sort of, given feedback on in the same way that the other
the assignments and stuff,
other assignments, exactly, and that actually doesn't happen. So that was just another one where my expectations were off.
You can follow up, so the feedback is there, because we share feedback with the external examiners.
No, I don't know what happened to it, but anyway, it's not, I didn't get it.
Tell us a little bit about your you mentioned that you came in with a German undergraduate degree, so you came in to the Masters in Organisational Behaviour track.
That's right.
And I would often get queries from potential students about whether it's harder to do that, if it's harder to come in without a psychology background. But equally, I also get questions from psychology students who ask, is it harder to come in without lots of business experience, or maybe they've been a clinical psychologist or counselling psychologist. So I guess I'd be interested just in your perspective on coming from an undergraduate degree in German. Did you feel that it was harder or easier, or?
I mean, I suppose the reality is I don't know any different. So it just was what it was. I don't think it's a barrier. So not only did I not come with a background in psychology, I also didn't come with a BSc. So I actually hadn't done a science degree, and what I realized is that the structure is quite different. I was used to it's just a different type of way of getting graded, and obviously doing an MSc, there's this sort of format of especially I found this when it came to this dissertation, this understanding the format of a lit review. I remember when we did our first lit review, I was like, what the hell is a lit review? I don't even know, this means nothing to me. Whereas other people who had come from a psychology degree kind of knew a little bit the drill. Things like references, I had no clue of how to reference things properly. So I think that there was definitely stuff that I just had to learn from scratch. I do think that was covered quite well on the course though, and I do think that you guys did a good job of teaching how to kind of not fulfill the requirements, but what the structure is, what the language is that's used, how these things are pulled together. And I do think that was quite helpful. And ultimately, frankly, for the dissertation, nobody said this up front, but basically what it seems like everybody ended up doing is you get given a dissertation and you just copy their headings, and everyone is the same. So every single thesis.
Everybody has a methodology section where they have to talk about their philosophy and then talk about their sample.
Right. And actually once you get that answers an awful lot of the questions of how on earth do I begin to pull this thing together. So I know, does it make it a little bit harder? Maybe. I mean, everybody finds it hard. There's no easy...
But what always strikes me, I think, is that I get the same question from both sides. I guess it's maybe just a little bit of imposter syndrome from everybody, that some people feel I'll be at a disadvantage because I don't have psychology, and then the psychology people sometimes feel they'll be at a disadvantage because they don't have maybe as much senior management experience or like corporate kind of experience.
Yeah.
We've tracked over the years performance across the two groups, and we don't see any enormous differences. And we've also tracked the kinds of jobs that people go into, and it hasn't seemed to make too much difference either.
I don't think it makes, I thought it might be a disadvantage to me. I don't think it makes any difference at all. And ultimately you're going to get out of it what you put into it and what you want to get out of it. And I would say there are people there on the course who are, there's a lot of, there's a lot of different motivations for doing it. Some people are getting, their company is paying for it, and that's a whole different type of motivation. Some people are doing it out of interest. They have like their kind of career educate, like being educated, and that was a whole different set of motivations. I think everyone does it for their own reason. Every reason is as valid as the next reason, and everybody kind of has an idea of what they want to get out of it, and I think that's totally fine.
Is there anything that you miss about doing your masters?
Yeah, oh my god, I miss being taught, quite honestly. It's actually such a luxury. So lucky to get paired up with somebody who has an expertise, or at least more expertise than me, in a particular area, and is going to tell you these are all the schools of thought in this area, and they're current for right now, and this is the latest stuff that's come up from it, and I'm going to tell you the authors you need to think about. I'm going to tell you the main models, the main constructs. And I saved all my lecture notes, and I saved all of the papers that I downloaded. I was pretty organized up front, and a friend of mine gave me advice when I first started doing the masters, and he was just like, get super organized, get either Mendeley or Zotero, and just like organize all of your papers and your reading. And it was the best advice anybody could have given me. And so I still, this week I was on there and like looking for papers and looking for, if we get asked a question about, I was actually looking at stuff about bias, and I was like, oh yeah, bias. I know that we did a bit on that with Marona, blah, 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 type in bias. Oh yeah, those are the papers, and this is the ones that I read. And I just think it's just such an enormous luxury to have that at your fingertips. So I really, really miss that. And I immediately felt disconnected from it when we stopped, and I've been thinking about how do I manage to keep my hand in, how can I stay connected to these different schools of thought and what's going on in them.
And you're still using that little library that you built up for yourself of resources?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, 100%.
So what, something comes up in work and you go and search for things that you've read, or? Yeah,
so so at the moment we are, because in my Qualtrics, so I actually got a new job, and for sure I got a promotion and a new job in work, and my new job is designing, it sits within our product development team, but it's basically designing employee-centric solutions that will be content-based solutions. And so one of the questions that I have to answer as part of my new job is how do we define employee experience management. We talk about employee experience management as an organization, but actually what underpins that and why is that important? And one of the things that I always remember was we did a class on psychological contract fulfillment, which basically talks about how everybody has these implicit expectations that they walk into a job with, and if those expectations are or aren't met, then it solicits a reaction from the employee. And this is and that aligns a lot with this question of what is the employee experience? Well, the employee experience, employees have different expectations, and if your experience that you're giving them doesn't align with those expectations, then they're going to have a certain reaction. So I went in, looked up the psychological contract fulfillment slides, the lecture slides, which the teacher had nicely summarized all of the different schools and pulled it all together. And then I had a number of papers that have been pulled out, and all you need to do is start with papers, and then that's your thread, and you can just follow that thread, as far as you need to get to with a particular question. So yeah, all the time, genuinely.
That's brilliant. And if you had any, I think in about 2 or 3 minutes we might open up and see if anybody has any questions for you, but maybe just one last one for me. For people who might start the course this autumn, what are your words of advice?
Words of advice. So go digital. I was thinking I was going to go have like a binder and books and printing papers out and like highlighting, and just forget about that. Go digital. You'll get with the DCU like account, you've got kind of your Google Docs, and just get comfortable now with taking notes in Google Docs. It changes everything. And get really organized on how you're going to pull all that together, and then get a place where you can organize all of your papers. Get comfortable with reading stuff online, with highlighting stuff online. Genuinely go digital. It will elevate what you can do. The other piece of advice is figure out your grade that you would be happy with. So for me, it was a 2-1, which is 60 and above. And then just do enough to get that grade. And the reason I say that, and maybe this isn't advice that's applicable for everyone, but I have a tendency to put a lot of pressure on myself and get really carried away. And I think I just needed to, you know, you get to a point, especially when papers are due and whatever else, where you need to just submit something. You need to just let it go and just submit it. And you know that it's good enough. You've got it to get the grade that you need. And you could try and tune it up and get that extra, whatever it is, few percent on there, but actually just submit it and just let it go. And I think being really clear about what you want to get out of it is really important. I also, going into it, knew that a big part of what I wanted to get out of it was genuinely learning. It wasn't really, I mean, the qualification is nice. The qualification is not why I did it, though. I really genuinely wanted to learn. And so as long as I was learning and reading, I felt like I was getting good value out of everything. You'll make time for it. You'll be amazed how much free time you have in your life just sitting around that you can squeeze master's work into. But do give it, you know, this is like, I used to think to myself every week, now is the time. You've been given 3 papers to read per module, so like 9 papers to read this week, but read them now, because if you leave them until the end of the course, you won't read them. And part of the value of doing this is in reading the stuff. Like, just read it, note down some stuff on it. You don't have to read it in depth. You get pretty good. It takes time, but you do get better the more you do at kind of being able to pick up the key points out of papers without actually reading the whole thing. My first semester, I read every single paper in detail, and by the end, you're like, boom, okay, learning, okay, yeah, done, okay, easy.
But papers are just like what you were saying about the dissertation. Like, every paper has in or around the same heading, so the same, like, and so you'll know after a while which paragraph I need to get like the summary of what the results were, or which paragraph do I need to go to figure out why they needed to do this in the first place. So.
That's right. But you won't get there unless you actually just dig in and start reading. And that, I really would embrace the reading, because you won't get the opportunity to do that amount of reading again. You'll never have the reason or the pressure or the imperative to do it. So that would be my advice.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sarah. So there are a few questions in the chat, but they're mainly kind of logistical ones for me, so I'll take them right at the end. But if anybody wants to take themselves off mute and ask Sarah a question, feel free to join us.
Silence.
Hi there, my name is Julianne. Thank you very much for this. It's really, really informative and very pleasant to listen to. I just have a question. I know that you were saying you're not a strategy person, but are you aware from your peers that were in that realm what they got from it? I just briefly, I don't have a psychology background, so I'm one of those people that asks one of the questions, not the other one, you know. So I don't have a psychology background, and so just wondering, from that perspective, do you know what they gained? Was there a particular area that they really excelled in?
Yeah, it's a good one. It's so I would the sorts of things that we cover, I would say in any organization, like in order to get anything done, at some point you need to use people. I don't think there's any like company where people are completely out of the loop. And so I think that even if I think about Seamus, who was the GM that I spoke about, he didn't have anything to do with HR or people in his role, but he had a broader leadership role. Like, he needs to know how to organize and manage people within his business to meet his objectives. And I think a lot of times, if I look at like our business internally, we tend to try, you know, if we have a problem with like our promotion cycle process, or it's frustrating people, or we've got attrition, we tend to try and solve the problem from scratch, whereas actually this question has kind of been asked and answered already, and you just need to know where to start looking to get those answers. And I feel like that's where, for example, the talent management module that we did was super helpful. For sure, there are some modules that are more academic, like we do a piece on selection and assessment where it kind of gets into the psychometric space, and that's like quite measurement specific focused, and that's less, I would say personally, less practically relevant, but it also balances out the sort of super practical stuff like talent management, like strategy.
Okay.
Does that answer your question? I hope it does.
Yeah, thanks Minnie. Yeah, no, that's great.
I suppose as well, it's worth saying, like, the aim of this program is not to equip people in strategy. Like, the strategy module is there because people who have psychology expertise need to be able to speak to the people making strategic decisions. But for the most part, like, my perspective on it anyway is that the people who are on the program that are already making strategic decisions got to their senior management position because of some other technical expertise. So they got there because they were an engineer or a technology expert or a chemist or whatever it was, whatever industry they work in. And then they realized, okay, now that I'm in this position, I'm also responsible for motivating people and being a good leader and thinking more about talent management. And that wasn't part of my training as an engineer or as a chemist or as a technology expert. And so those are the kinds of people that would tend to come on the program. So we do have some strategy in there, but it's definitely not the intention of the program that people would come without strategy expertise and leave being like the biggest expert in their company on strategy. Okay. It's very much focused on people and psychology.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Just ask a question on the dissertation. It's Stephen Shannon here. So is that submitted on sort of the June, July of the final year, or what sort of effort are you talking about? You mentioned kind of 8 to 9 months. Is that kind of working right the way through the final year?
Yeah, so you kind of start thinking about your dissertation pretty early on. Sarah, what did you write your literature review on in the first semester? Was it related or?
No, well, vaguely in the same ballpark. So I think we submitted ours on the 5th of July. Well, I know we submitted ours on the 5th of July because that date is etched.
Forever etched in your memory.
And I would say started properly thinking about the research question, like properly, quite honestly, September the year before. So the start of year 2 was when I really started thinking about it. We did, when did we do our poster? Was that in year 1?
Yeah, semester 2 of year 1.
So end of year 1 was like, I don't know, for me personally, I would say it was that my poster, so at the end of year 1 in April, it must be then, in year 1, you have to do a kind of thing where you put a research proposal together, which should inform the thesis. And mine did, but my research proposal was just like 5 things. And then, you know, my final piece was maybe 20% of what my research proposal was. So it helped. It was the groundwork 100%. But if I were to say when I really started thinking about my research question, it was at the beginning of year 2. Maybe I'm giving you the unofficial, not the right advice, but this is what I did anyway. And then I suppose in my mind, really between September and December was kind of groundwork and trying to refine that question. And then I would say that final 6 months from January to the end of June, it just kind of ramped up and intensified. There's a date that you have to get some chapters in by, and I think it's like mid-May or something like that.
It's 1 month before the submission date, so it depends just on when,
End of May. And I would say you, because the challenge is that you're trying to submit all of your other papers as well, your year 2 work, which is quite substantial. So to my mind, I kind of kept it ticking along in the background and submitted all my year 2 coursework. And then when you finally submit your kind of year 2 papers and essays, I think I took a week's break, and then I started cracking on with the dissertation, and it was pretty intense. It was quite unpleasant and quite intense. But I got stuck, I got really stuck, and I was like going round and round and round and round in circles because I couldn't figure out how to do my analysis because I didn't know how to use SPSS. So I was like I got really stuck, but it was a very intense period. I would say there was 6 weeks where it was like pretty full on.
Just thinking with dissertation.
Yeah.
I suppose I can reflect on my own experience and also on like the way that we've tried to set up the program. So we try and set the program up so that from the start you can make decisions about what interests you. So in your first semester, one of your big assignments is to write a literature review. I know Sarah mentioned that already. And that is an alien kind of a skill for a lot of people on the program, and not just people who didn't come from a psychology background, but also there will be a lot of people even on the psychology track who haven't been in formal education for a very long time. So it's a reasonably alien skill for a lot of people. But you pick in your literature review, you can do it on any topic in the area of organizational behavior and psychology, relatively broadly defined. And that's sort of your first step towards like trying to think about what interests you. Now I would say about 50% of people change topic completely, and about 50% of people build on what they learned from their lit review. Some people like get to the end of their lit review and say, I never want to read another paper about that again, and I'm going to do something totally different. And some people kind of stick with what they did. I changed. I think I did my lit review on employee turnover because at the time I was leaving my job, and I have a habit of trying to learn more about what I'm experiencing. And then I did my dissertation on self-regulated learning, because at the time I was working in training and development, or learning and development. And so I was interested just in people's learning and the kind of strategies that they chose for learning stuff in work. In your second semester, then you do a research methods module, and the final product of that is your proposal. And along the way, there are kind of a couple of different steps. One of the major ones being a poster that Sarah also mentioned, which is like your first experience of putting your like ideas around what your research might look like into some sort of written format, and chatting about that with some of your peers and some other faculty and things. And then people differ depending on when they do it. So I collected my data over the summer between the 2 years, and that took an enormous amount of pressure off me in second year, because the first semester of second year is still busy, so it's still the same kind of workload. But if you're trying to do your dissertation at the same time, then I guess I couldn't figure out how I would do both of those things at the same time. So I collected my data during the summer, and we do allocate supervisors at the start of the summer so that people can do that if they want. But everybody's sort of different in their time management preferences. I've always been the kind of person who panics if I leave something to the last minute. So I was like, I have to get this done as quickly as I can to take some of the pressure off the second year.
Okay. I collected my data, I think from about mid-Jan or something, puts like February, March. And I would definitely say that was a good, like for me, and I think that felt like a really good time to do it. Any later than that, I would say you're putting a lot of pressure on. The other thing I did want to say, because I do think this matters. So one of the things that I did towards the end of my second year is I added up all of my grades. You know how much each grade counts for. So I created a spreadsheet where I figured out like what my final grade was shaping up to be, because they tell you the weighting of each module, and if you know the grades you got for the modules so far, you can figure out sort of what your final grade will be. And I actually worked out what grade I would need to get on my dissertation to get a 2-1, which was my goal. And then I realized when I'd done that I had a shot at a first. So I made a decision with my dissertation. I'm going to go like hell for leather. I'm going to go for this, and I'm going to really try and pull something together that will get me the first. But I would also recommend doing that same thing, because it can take a lot of pressure off the dissertation. In my case, I just ended up putting more pressure on, which is classic. But it also can take a lot of pressure off the dissertation, because you can basically figure out, like, if I get a 56 on this, I'll still get a 2-1. And then you just kind of don't need to worry about doing something incredible and knocking it out of the park. So I would definitely do something like that as well.
Yeah. I would say like more than half of the master's students that I supervise have a conversation at some point about like trying to make what they're aiming for a little bit less complex and a little bit more achievable, so that it fits in with their life and that they don't have too horrible a time in their last 6 weeks like you did.
Oh yeah, it's horrendous.
I've got loads of questions here, I think 4, about whether we're going to be online or in person. We, like lots of other sectors, are waiting to see what happens with public health advice by the time we come back in October. So it makes a really big difference to us, for instance, whether the advice is 1 meter social distancing or 2 meter social distancing in terms of how many people we can fit in rooms safely. Our first priority will always be the safety of students and staff. But at the same time, our preference is to have as much face-to-face interaction as we can have while doing that safely. And my hope is that because we seem like we're unlikely that we're going to have undergraduate lectures face-to-face, then we have lots of big rooms that would usually house like 300 undergraduates that we might be able to use for some of our postgrad lectures. So we're looking into that at the moment. But again, it makes like, I think it quadruples the capacity of a room if we move from 2 meter social distancing to 1 meter. So that has a really big impact in terms of exactly what that's going to look like. What we're preparing for at the moment is like 100% online, because we're preparing for the possibility that there's some sort of second wave and that the whole country is locked down again. I'm not a public health expert and I can't really tell the extent to which that is probable or likely. But that's what we're preparing for, because what we know that we can do really well is the face-to-face interaction. So if we prepare for the other end, then we know that we can switch back if we need to and if we can. What I would like to make sure is that we have at least some time at the start of the year where we get to meet as a new cohort. Even if that means that it's me on stage in the Helix and like a room that usually fits 2,000 people with everybody spread out all over it. So that's what I'm aiming, that we will at least have some time. But again, obviously we're dependent on you guys being able to travel to campus. So if there's any sort of travel restrictions, obviously we need to make sure that people can get there. The commitment that DCU has made to students for the next year means that for the academic year of 2020-2021, there will always be an option to attend virtually. So even if we move, like even if everything calms down with COVID-19 and we're all allowed to move around as freely as we like and we go back to 1 meter social distancing or whatever, and we end up back to face-to-face, even if that happens, you would still have an option to attend virtually. So we will still have Zoom sessions that you can dial into a face-to-face class. because we do understand that some people might have like underlying health conditions or maybe dependents that are vulnerable that might make them less comfortable to interact in a face-to-face situation for the next year. So that's where we're at the moment. And some people have asked if I think that it will impact the level of interaction. I don't think it will impact the level of interaction in class so much. We've had some experience with that in the last few months of semester 2 this year. We've got very familiar with using breakout rooms in Zoom and getting people into smaller groups so that they can chat and stuff. And we've learned a lot, I think, from our experiences of that. I think what we would aim to do differently in the first semester of next year is to provide more asynchronous content. So where there is a section that a faculty member is likely to be talking, say for 20 minutes or something, that we would record that and post it so that you watch that. And then that when you're in a live classroom setting, that we're working in smaller groups on that content. And that's our intention. Although we are obviously always hoping that we will get to a situation where we can do more and more face-to-face. The thing that I am less confident about is the informal social interaction around the program and how an online environment might impact that. And something that I'm working with this summer with our students that are moving into year 2. So they've experienced a year of, well, almost a year, they got to March, of face-to-face interaction and of, you know, bumping into people in the queue in the canteen or in the library or whatever and having a chat. So I'm working with them over this summer to think about what we can do to recreate some of those more informal experiences and that kind of network outside of class time. And I think one of those things that will be important is your group. So the group, like Sarah mentioned a couple of times, how useful her group were in terms of support. And maybe Sarah, it might be interesting actually to know how you guys interacted. Like, did you tend to interact on a Wednesday when you're on campus, or did you meet up on other days of the week? Or
with my work group?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, we all sat together. We were like kids in school. We were like, made sure we saved seats for each other. And we had a pretty scandalous WhatsApp chat going throughout the whole course. And then when we had coursework to do, we generally just connected on Zoom.
Yeah. So I think some of those processes might not change so much as long as we can try and recreate the opportunity to chat as a group during class. Because my sense is that most of the actual group work and assignment work that happens actually is already happening in virtual sort of environments, because people tend to live in different parts of Ireland and in different parts of the city, and they don't tend to find it that easy to meet outside of the actual lecture time anyway. So just people asking more logistic questions. So yes, it's a 2-year part-time course and there's no other option. You can't do it full-time. It's designed for people who are working. Did you stay in touch with the people that you are working with in the class?
Yeah, 100%. There's a few, so my immediate group, yes, and then there was a lady who used to give us a lift because she lived close to where we were. So she used to give us a lift to and from class, and have struck up a really lovely friendship with her. And there's a few other pieces. I've had a few LinkedIn messages on certain topics from other people maybe I didn't know so well, but I'd know them, you know, from the course. It's a good network of people to have, and you definitely have, even if you didn't speak a lot to someone, you have an implicit bond with them of the experience.
Because you survived together.
Absolutely, but genuinely, it's a real one. And so there is like a kind of a, if you need something, reach out to them, and they'll, so I would be amazed if I reached out to anybody on my course, whether they knew me or not, and they weren't receptive.
Yeah. I'm still in touch with people that I did my program with. In fact, somebody that was in my team at the time is now doing a PhD that I'm supervising. So she came back like quite a few years later. So we work really closely together, and I'd still be in touch with quite a few other people as well. One thing, so there's a question here was, how do you stay in touch with classmates? And the second part of the question is, do you get connected with other years cohorts? And I think that's probably something that we could try to do more of. Like, I think some of it happens informally through like social media and networks and things like that, but I think we could probably do more of that. And one of the things that we were looking into in like supporting people online, so if we find ourselves in a situation next year where everything is totally online and we can never meet, is how we can maybe try and get some alumni involved in chatting to students and supporting some of the work that they're doing. And I would also stay in touch with quite a few alumni from the program through research projects. So at the moment I have, I think, 3 different research projects working with people who kind of left the program and then wanted to do a little bit of research in their organization and got back in touch to say, would you be interested in getting involved or advising on something or whatever. So I tend to stay in touch with people like that. And then the people that I've supervised, I tend to stay in touch with even more and try and publish some of their work and see if they can get something more out of their master's dissertations. Great. Sarah, I'm sure you probably have somewhere else to be, so I won't keep you any longer. Thank you so much for joining us. I really do appreciate it. And I think it's been really useful for everybody to get that realistic preview of what it might be like. Thank you, Sarah.
Pleasure. Total pleasure. My advice would be, do it. If you're thinking about doing it. Honestly, best decision I made. Genuinely changed my trajectory. So I would be a thumbs up.
Thank you, Sarah.
See you guys. Good luck.
I can stay for another